So hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest Reuters Events supply chain webinar. My name is Hugh Rauser, and I'll be your host for today. The title for today's webinar is The Tech Advantage, Fueling Success in Global Trade Compliance. And over the next hour, we're going to be talking about how an evolving regulatory landscape is putting more and more pressure on freight forwarders and their customers to adhere to some increasingly stringent compliance standards. We're going to be discussing the context, so setting the scene, understanding where these new pressures are coming from and why they're happening now. We're going to be talking about the high stakes of non-compliance and its impact on the logistics community. So what happens if you get this kind of thing wrong? And we're going to be thinking about how you can leverage technology to turn compliance into your competitive advantage, which is something everyone should be aiming to do, thinking about this as an opportunity. Now, before I introduce our fantastic speakers for today's session, we have a poll, an audience poll. We'd like to get your thoughts too. We want this to be an interactive session, so we'd love to hear what you think as our audience before we get going. And so I'm going to launch this now. The question is, what are you most concerned about with regards to compliance and global trade? And there are 5 options. Increased scrutiny from agencies like the BIS and the US Department of State on compliance standards. Multilateral frameworks like the Wassenaar Arrangement requiring more transparency. Geopolitics leading to key sourcing locations becoming sanctioned. The your tech stack falling out of date with the latest changes in customs and compliance. Or finally, leveraging data effectively while also keeping it secure, which is obviously a real challenge. And if you have an other, quote unquote other, if you have another suggestion that you'd like to put in here, you can pop that in the Q&A function, and I will keep an eye on that as this poll rolls on. But while I can see people are voting away here. That's great. Keep going. So while you vote on that poll, I'm going to take a moment to introduce our speaker lineup. So I'd like to come to Naki first. Naki, would you be able to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role and the organization you are from?
Right. Thanks, Hugh, and welcome to everyone who has logged in for this call. My name is Nachi, and I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm part of the business development team at WiseTech Global, CargoWise, and I have a special focus on global customs as well. And so effectively, I work with companies around the world to really understand their business requirements and their challenges, and to look at how they can really use technology to enable their logistical supply chains and to make them more efficient and ultimately more profitable for themselves as well as their clients.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Naki. Leah, could I come to you next, please? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from?
Thanks, Hugh. And I'm just really grateful to Reuters for letting me join this panel with Nachi and Freya to talk about this increasingly important problem. So I'm Leah. I come from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and that's an agency that coordinates trade policy across the U.S. government. I focus on customs and trade facilitation, and that means working with our customs agency, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, under the Department of Homeland Security, working with the State Department, Commerce, Treasury, Transportation, many other agencies to coordinate trade policy, and to focus on what customs should be viewing as a dual responsibility, according to the World Customs Organization, of ensuring that trade in goods is secure and safe, and also facilitative, that we're facilitating trade at the same time. And so I get the chance to work internationally and domestically on that dual purpose.
Thanks, Leah. I think that word facilitative came up a lot in our practice call, and we wanted to underline the importance of that amongst all of these kind of challenges, is facilitating the trade. Thanks so much, Leah. It's great to have you here. Freya, could I come to you next, please?
Cool. Thank you so much, Hugh. And thank you, everyone, for spending some time today with both Naki, Leah, Hugh, and myself to discuss this. So great to see you all here. My name is Freya Page. I'm Director of Global Outreach at Caron. Caron is a sort of deep data and open source research company working primarily around sanctions, but very much trade export controls, forced labour, various types of financial crime risk. My job as director is to engage with both public and private sectors, more on the thought leadership side, talking to governments and corporates to understand risk and really what that looks like from a regulatory perspective and how that sort of impacts business. My background is over 10 years in UK government, working at HM Treasury. I was one of the founding members of OFSI, working in enforcement, compliance, and also the guidance space. So I come from a very regulatory background on the UK side here, and I work globally across UK and Europe as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Freya. Thank you, all three of you, for joining today. It's great to have you here. Now, before we get going with the question, thank you to our audience for taking part in this poll. If you haven't already voted, I'm afraid I'm ending the poll now, and I'm going to share the results. So, out of those options, you'll see now the majority of the vote share went to increased scrutiny from agencies like the BIS and the US Department of State on compliance standards, which I guess makes sense. And then coming in second was that challenge of key sourcing locations becoming sanctioned. And so that's interesting to see. Thank you, everyone, for taking part in that. And so I kind of want to lead in from that into our first question, which is about setting the scene and just understanding what the stakes are here. We've seen that people are really concerned about those pieces of legislation and the scrutiny coming from those agencies. So what is the scale of the challenge currently facing freight forwarders and shippers? And why has this challenge become more complex in recent times? Naki, could I come to you first with that question, please?
Thank you, Hugh. And it's a great question to understand, the environment. It's an incredibly complex environment and a highly regulated environment, with every country and different region having very specific rules, laws, procedures, certifications, etc., which are required dependent on the goods that are moving and on different trade flows. And in this incredibly complex environment, if you get it wrong, you're actually breaking the law. So the penalties which are attracted and attached to these type of things are really large penalties, even including prison sentences in certain cases. And aside from the direct penalties, the knock-on negative effects to a company's reputation, to goods not arriving when they should, affecting customer service and experience, these can really be quite massive. And when you add to that this is a constantly changing and evolving space, it really becomes a place of high risk for the freight forwarder. More and more importers and exporters are relying on the freight forwarder to get involved and assist them on a lot of these compliance challenges as well. And so, the freight forwarder is faced by an incredibly complex environment with ever-increasing scrutiny, which is constantly changing. And, that's really the environment that they're playing in. And so I think that gives just a little bit of an idea of the challenges that freight forwarders are facing.
Yeah, no, thank you for that answer. And Leah, could I just kind of come to you for your perspective here on some of these changes and where you're seeing changes, particularly from that government perspective?
Yes, definitely, because building on Nachi's point of view from the perspective of companies and businesses, when it comes to government agencies, they're really facing the changes over the last decade that have been brought about by the rise in e-commerce. The majority of shipments are no longer made by a few companies in these large loads of the same items that are going to one importer and being distributed to brick and mortar stores. As we know, shipments are more commonly made by large numbers of sellers in a large variety of items to an even larger number of customers. And that shift has really changed the way customs agencies need to address enforcement. And customs and the other border agencies that they work with, they can't rely as much anymore, putting responsibility on the importer, because more often than not, that importer is you or me or anybody who bought something online. And they don't know potentially the origin of the goods or even remember it. And they certainly don't know all of the regulations that the good needs to comply with. At the same time, customs can't just look to the exporter because they're often in a jurisdiction where customs doesn't have authority. So in this age of decentralized trade, customs is looking more and more at new techniques to enhance their enforcement capabilities. And that means data. It means watching trends. It means getting leads on what input data they need to focus on. It means getting data from traders who want to demonstrate compliance. And that all means technology. And that's why this webinar is so important.
That's yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that, definitely. But I guess that's great to hear kind of that perspective on the import side. Freya, I'd be really interested to come to you on the export side, and maybe if you could tell us sort of maybe about something like how it would look in practice. What are some of the products, if we think specifically about products, what are some of the products that can flag issues in this new environment?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, you. I mean, it's about the products. It's also about sort of the red flags as well that we're looking at and that we're seeing in this particular environment as well, because we know obviously international trade, it relies on intermediaries, it relies on freight forwarders to facilitate this movement of goods, which of course is very, very wide ranging. And of course, that complete vulnerability to sanctions and export controls evasion is really live. And it's sort of, if you lack a robust compliance program, you need to be looking, like you said, at those goods and those products of what can sort of trip you up. I mean, we've seen lots of guidance coming out of the US over the last year or so, and a bit more. I think the latest was back in December when we had the Quint Seal compliance notice that was very much geared towards this industry. And there was a number of red flags and products that were sort of, flagged within that to say, look, you need to be paying extra attention to implying enhanced due diligence. And you've got basic things like checking that documents aren't falsified, checking that there's no abnormal shipping routes that are being undertaken, that ship-to-ship transfers, looking at complex ownership and management as well of that supply chain. And those things are really handy from sort of a bird's eye view to look at the entire picture. But of course, once you get into more of the granular detail, you're not just looking at KYC, know your customer. You're looking at KYC in terms of know your cargo. You have to really understand what it is that's involved in what you're facilitating. What are you shipping, and also where is it going to? So KYC, again, know your country. So it sort of applies there as well. So, and this sort of thing isn't very simple at all, because like I said, it's very granular. You have to get into the weeds of these things. And some of the products that we're looking at here from an export controls perspective, are really difficult to make a judgment on. So, for example, you can have, dual use goods, such as, say, we take DSLR cameras, for example. We call it a dual use good because it has both civilian and military application. So not only can you use it to take nice family photos or nice holiday snaps when you're out and about, but it can also be mounted onto a drone to record high definition footage of enemy positions or infrastructure. It can be broken down into parts, so with the sensor can be removed and adapted to guide for precision guided missiles. Or enhanced visibility in low light conditions, those sort of things. Even washing machines, for example. The application here might seem a bit indirect, where am I going with this? But you can take a washing machine and then the components within it, such as the motors, the sensors, the control units, all of these things make them really valuable from a military purpose from a military application, particularly when you're looking at regions around the world that might be a lot more constrained in their resources. And it's thinking about how these products are getting to these areas and through which countries. So therefore, the real risk for freight forwarders technically what to me and you might be quite simple, straightforward products, but actually involved in that wider supply chain. The expectation is now to not just understand, your indirect relationships and with your suppliers, but also the product as well, and doing due diligence on that. Frustratingly, as yet, there are no silver bullets to really deal with. There's no one size fits all compliance approach that will pick out all of these issues. It is really hard. But that's why we're here today, and why webinars such as this are really useful, where we get together, we share and talk about these common issues, regulatory requirements, and we look at how we can better upskill ourselves and enhance our resources to comply with the regulatory landscape. And as Lyra said as well, it's making sure that we keep goods legitimately moving as well.
Thank you so much for that answer, Freya, because that's really helped to underline why this is such a key issue. This thing about dual use materials or technologies, when you're thinking about the geopolitical situation in certain parts of the world, and these technologies, advanced technologies, and what you can do with certain, whether it's a washing machine or something else, it really underlines the stakes at play here, and why these arrangements like the Wassenaar arrangement I know we've mentioned are in place. Like, it's not just to give people a headache, it's for a very serious reason. So thank you for that. And I know, Leah, I think you're kind of looking at other sort of issues that are equally serious around labor bans, on forced labor bans, and what that is meaning for customs requirements. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how it's impacting requirements for goods coming into the US?
Well, yeah, the Uyghur Forced Labor Enforcement Act, Prevention Act, excuse me, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act has really refocused U.S. Enforcement measures at the border on detecting goods that have been built with inputs that are produced with forced labor. And that is an emphasis that rides on top of U.S. Customs and Border Protection's existing responsibilities, partnering with 50 agencies across the U.S. government to enforce, to find violations of a variety of measures. So they're looking at consumer safety standards, food quality requirements, pharmaceutical approvals, intellectual property rights, evasion of anti-dumping duties, violations of the Endangered Species Act. I can go on and on, collection of excise taxes, hazardous waste, anti-money laundering, drug enforcement, weapons controls, sanctions violations, trade statistics, and free trade agreement enforcement, preference enforcement for rules of origin. And so the combination of all of these enforcement responsibilities is meaning that customs agencies for the US and around the world are really looking for some high-tech technology to help them monitor all of these streams of all of these various regulatory responsibilities. And so that leads to two issues. One, I think that folks need to be following is the fact that many of these regulations come from different backgrounds. So when it comes to forced labor, you've got this labor standards community and labor standards agencies, labor agencies focused on how to address this problem. At the same time, you have environmental NGOs working with environment agencies trying to rid supply chains of endangered species inputs. At the same time, the agricultural community is looking to make sure that products coming into the United States or products that are being imported into their country are produced in a way that's compliant with their agricultural requirements. And I think there is a bit of a disconnect from all of these communities, not realizing that they all had the same goal at the end of the day, which is to monitor from the beginning of the supply chain to the end of the supply chain, and tie that monitoring to the specific good that's being imported at one time. And coming to that technology solution that's going to tie that all together, I think is a real challenge going forward that we can look at in the regulatory community. At the same time, businesses can really play a part in making sure that customs agencies that are adopting new technology to handle this really massive responsibility over enforcement at the border are using technology that is the latest and greatest and works with their systems. So governments typically don't do a good job of upgrading technology or being aware of the latest trends, what's available. And so it behooves businesses to maybe get involved in bringing the agency communities together, and also having a role when their customs agencies are looking for solutions to advise them on what technology is really going to work the best for the most number of, for the largest number of traders, so that we can get our technologies, so that we can make technology decisions in the right way and really use technology as a benefit rather than as something that people just need to, get through to accomplish the trade.
Totally, kind of like what we've been talking about sort of since from the start of this webinar when it comes to that facilitation. And I'm glad, both with your answer there and with Freya's, it's kind of really giving us a sense of the scale of the challenge and the need for that attention to detail. I think with the KYC point, especially from Freya on both the customs, the cargo, and the country point, like there's so much that needs to be got right here. And that's kind of what I wanted to lead on to with the next question, which you've touched on, Leah, already. So what can we do about this? What can our audience think about in terms of solutions? So I'm curious to know how you're all working with customers or stakeholders to guide them through this process, and just a little bit more on how technology can help here. So Naki, I wanted to come to you first on that question.
Great, thank you. And Leah and Freya, you've really set the stage in terms of explaining the complexities that the freight forwarder needs to get involved in. As mentioned, more and more governments and different trading bodies are looking to the freight forwarder to fill in these gaps. And I couldn't help but smile, Leah, when you were giving the list of all the different types of compliance, and each one of those is a whole complex list of different rules and regulations and certificates across so many different government bodies that you wonder, how could any one person know all of this? And then every country has their own regulations, and we know that these are constantly shifting. And then, Freya, like I never knew that washing machines were a major challenge, and it just goes to show the complexity of totally innocent seeming goods, which suddenly, can be used for nefarious purposes. And so in this highly complex and regulated space, again, the freight forwarder needs to be able to rely on technology. And what I find really interesting about this call is we've got Leah, who's representing from government, who's involved in making the rules to deal with these complexities. Then Freya and from Quran is like, this index of all these different lists and regulations, etc. And then us from CargoWise is like, how can we provide this to the customer at the point when they need it to assist them to make, with actionable insights, to assist them to make the correct decisions and make sure they really do it all. And the real goal is to keep the goods flowing. It's not to stop the goods. It's to, no matter what chaos is happening in the world, what changes, etc., to keep it flowing and to make sure that we're able to enable it. And so, to do this without technology I think is impossible in this day and age. And I really appreciated your comment, Leah, about how we all in this together and greater collaboration between freight forwarders, between service providers, between different government bodies to really unlock the efficiencies and make it easier for those who want to keep the law, and more challenging for those who want to break it, is at the heart of what we're doing. And I find it, again, really interesting how we all are coming at this from different angles, but through collaboration, we are able to achieve quite incredible, breakthroughs in this space.
Thanks for that, Naki. And Freya, I'd love to come to you next and just kind of get a sense of Caron, and also just your perspective. The same question of like, how do we go about sort of approaching this? I know you said there's no silver bullets, but like, what are some of the first steps? What can people do to get through this process?
No, absolutely. Thank you, Hugh. And yeah, there's no silver bullets, but there are things we can do, right? There's definitely lots of things out there that we can put together. And again, when working together, we can ensure that we are as resilient as possible and we are protecting ourselves, our business, from that risk. I mean, in Caron, we're working a lot with our customers and our clients to really help them understand what that risk is that they face. I think ultimately, even with my sort of ex-regulatory sort of hat on, and in my current space within Caron as well, I really do believe data here is king. I think when you look at the volume of global trade data and the amount of information that's within it, finding a lot of this risk is a needle in a haystack. So to be able to navigate through this data, which is essential to understand, who your customers are, where it's going, what the actual products are, what the regulations are, to understand every part of that end-to-end trade. You need to have that data, but you have to understand it. It has to live and breathe in your system. And that data and technology really has to work hand in glove throughout every part of that process as well. And I mean, I'm going to touch on AI briefly, only because I get asked about it quite a lot. And a lot of people say, well, can we just rely on AI to do the work for us? Can we just pretty much outsource it to an AI program and just let it run and do its thing, and it will tell us what the issues are? And I think AI definitely has a place in when we're thinking about tools that we can use to make ourselves more resilient. But AI is only as good as we're telling it to be, ultimately. So it has a place, and if you're giving it lots of data, then AI is great. It can digest that, it can make fancy charts, and it can tell you about any behavior patterns and that sort of stuff. But to actually really understand your risk and your exposure, you need to have that human impact. At Caron, we do have all of our analysts. Of course, we don't rely on machine learning. It has its place, but we still do all of our research with humans. You have to understand the regions, the risk, the nuances, some of the language that sits behind a lot of the documents that we read and we research. So I think having a blend of technology to support the data that you're inputting, plus that human understanding, human intelligence, is really essential to ensuring that you're building a really good compliance program within your business. Ultimately, yes, it takes resource. It's, a lot of this stuff isn't cheap because you have to invest in good compliance tools. And that's where you need that top-down support within your organisation. So ensuring that, as long as you have that top-down support within, and it's really understanding as well that compliance is not an obstacle or a blocker. It's actually understanding that compliance actually will enable your business to actually flow and, to actually, be a lot more productive. And not like I said, that top-down issue of resource is constantly something that people, question over. But yeah, I think that's what is that data is key, really.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, coming back to that issue of trying to think of compliance as something that can be a strategic advantage if you think about it with the right attitude. And you were talking about combining the tech with the human impact. So Leah, I know you've already shared some insights around technology and kind of what you're seeing there. But I guess on the human side, in our prep call, you kind of talked a lot about how people need to be working with their governments a little bit more. Could you kind of tell us a little bit about that and tell our audience about the importance of kind of collaborating with local governments?
So I'll focus a little bit on the shippers and freight forwarders, customs brokers, logistics providers, and what they can be looking for in the future. I would say, I think from a enforcement and compliance perspective, we see these professionals as perfectly situated for identifying risk. And that's because they have insight, they have the potential for insight into their client's business and an understanding of the world of trade. And so what we're seeing and what these individuals should be looking out for is a trend of government regulations that not only target the importer and exporter, but target those logistics providers and other individuals or other organizations that are situated along the supply chain and involved in a transaction that can help with compliance and even help provide that data that's needed to find the needle in a haystack these days. And so freight forwarders, logistics providers, customs brokers, even e-commerce marketplaces and potentially fulfillment centers should be ready to adapt to these new regulations and be on the lookout for taking on this added responsibility. And I think at the end of the day, like we've been saying from the very beginning, that's going to involve relying on really great technology. And yeah.
Amazing. And Naki, I wanted to come to you finally on this kind of technology question and just hear a little bit more about like what is CargoWise doing with its customers at the moment. I know that you've got some new products and some new capabilities. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and kind of how you're working with your customers.
Thanks, Hugh. So as we've discussed, this is an incredibly complex space. Freya, I really like the way you explained it of KYC, know your customer, know your cargo, and know your country. We refer to it as who, what, and where. So you got to know the who, in other words, who's sending the goods, who's receiving the goods, and then those need to then be screened, denied party screening against a whole host of different lists that need to be checked to make sure that that there's nobody in those companies who you shouldn't be trading with. And that's a place where we rely on partners like Aron to keep those lists up to date in proper data forms, so that when we are doing that, we are accessing the latest data and the most accurate data in those spaces. A second part is the what, which is what are the goods you are moving? And again, that suddenly triggers off, no, washing machines can't just be moved so easily. And DSL cameras aren't just okay for holidays. And so again, there's such a lot of different rules. And remember, new products are always coming out and being innovated. So again, we need to rely on partners like Aron to provide that up-to-date information. And then again, there's all the different government bodies that Leah was mentioning, from agricultural to safety to health to food, and each of them have all these different rules. And so under the what, there's a huge amount of different regulations that can actually cause challenges if you are not aware of them. And then in terms of the where, i.e. country of origin, country of destination, and in some cases even transit country, it becomes a really ever-changing, shifting rules and regulations around what you can and can't do and what's acceptable. One of the general principles is that ignorance of the law is not an excuse. And so somehow or other, when the freight forwarder receives a request to move some goods from anywhere in the world to somewhere else, they need to be able to rely on a solution that ensures that they're doing what they need to do. And as both Leah and Freya have mentioned, technology is at the heart of this. It's no longer possible to do this by flipping through pages of books, etc. There's just too many, and it's just too easy to miss something, and the risks are just too high. And so at the core of our solution around compliance, what we've done is we have brought the who, the what, and the where all together in one place. And so when a customer now is suddenly doing a shipment, it's picking up consignee, it's picking up consignor, it's picking up origin, it's picking up destination, and it's picking up the line items. And then based on that, it is screening it through all of the multitude, myriad lists of regulations and rules we've discussed in order to be able to tell the freight forwarder right there at that point, these are certificates you need. Have you done this check? Are you doing everything that's right? And so we're quite excited about this, and we really do see this as a way to assist and enable the companies operating in this space.
Well, I can understand why you're excited about it, given the questions that have been raised in this webinar so far and the need for that level of detail and scrutiny and the scale of this challenge. It does definitely sound exciting. And I think especially kind of coming on to the next question that we have, our audience poll raised some concerns. The two most popular votes were around that increased scrutiny from the BIS, and also like the increased number of sanctions and how to avoid these sanctioned countries in this kind of really complicated global supply chains. And so far, you guys have definitely kind of underlined that. But we're heading towards 2025 now. And I'm curious to know, how do you expect these challenges to develop over the next 12 months? And how can our audience prepare themselves adequately? Freya, could I come to you first with that question?
You can. Great question. I think anyone working in the space would love a crystal ball, right? It would make our lives so much easier. But I think this space is always dynamic, right? It's never going to stay the same, and at least not for very long anyway. It will constantly evolve as foreign policy, geopolitics sort of works itself out, and it will always be reflective of the environment that we're in. I mean, at Caron, a lot of our customers that we've been talking to, certainly over the last, I don't say like last few months, they're still very much struggling with, I've talked a lot about on the export control side, but, the common high priority list of items, the harmonized system codes, HS code products. There's still a lot of issues grappling even with that, and that's been something that's been in play for a while now. And people are still trying to understand, how does that really take effect in their businesses? How can they really apply that type of scrutiny and that sort of level of due diligence? So I think going into 2025, that's not going to go away. That's still going to be there. And I think as well, I mean, Leah's mentioned it already, but the challenges with forced labour goods, we've seen a lot of corporates, apparel, manufacturers starting to really think, okay, we need to really step up our game here, and that's not just in the US, that is globally as well, across into UK and Europe. So I think as we sort of raise awareness, I think is a big part of this. I do think the CHPL and forced labour goods are definitely two key items here as well that we need to think about in terms of subject areas. Getting people more engaged, I think, is crucial in this. I do think there's an awareness raising. I think traditionally, certainly from my experience, these types of restrictions are more commonplace in the financial sector, financial institutions dealing with these sort of very, tight regulatory controls. There's level of scrutiny, and you see that by huge fines and regulatory action. And I think this is really just evolving into this space, and we're now seeing a huge area of a huge sector of business that now is coming under the same scrutiny that banks are maybe a little bit more experienced about. They've been dealing with it for years. So we still have to really upskill. We still have to bring ourselves to this space where banks have been previously. And I think key for me then is, investing in technology and compliance programs, enhancing internal training programs. It's not just about bringing stuff in, it's making sure that your business understands the value that it's bringing and how important it is, and how that should be really ingrained in the business. It's conducting comprehensive risk assessments of your business and your clients, and engaging with regulators as well, engaging with regulators and fellow industry groups, so that you're talking to your peers, to really stay ahead of, or not even ahead of, actually, you want to stay in the game. You don't want to be even get ahead of the game, because even getting ahead of it at the moment is very difficult. You just want to be in the game. So I think doing those things, should be priority for 2025.
Just stay on the pitch, stay in the game. Yeah. Thanks for that, Freya. That was really useful, I hope, for our audience. Leah, could I come to you then with that same question of looking ahead to the next 12 months? Just how can our audience think about what can they prepare? What should they be thinking about in terms of strategies and mentalities?
Well, I think on building on what Freya mentioned, one way to think about the trade world these days is that it is catching up, or having to look to adopt many of the technology systems that other industries have been using now for decades. But we really are a little behind the 8 ball. I mean, we're still using paper clearance documents and things like that. So I think businesses should be prepared to look to technology to enhance trade procedures. So that means going to electronic trade documents, using electronic bills of lading, and using single windows to submit your data to a country's customs agency. All of that is moving. This is the time when the trade community is shifting from sort of paper to electronic. And in the same way that businesses, I think another point that Freya made that's really important is collaboration and being involved as the developments take place. So in the same way that as a business, you're evaluating what technology you need and what data you need and how you can use it, keep in mind that governments are doing the same thing. They are very many of them are on the cusp of figuring out what data they want to use and figuring out what technology they should use. And so that, I think what we were talking about before, this idea that the trade community really needs to provide their input to governments in their technology decisions is really important. Joining associations or other organizations that have the ear of customs, getting involved in notice and comment procedures is a great way to troubleshoot new technology choices that the government is making. Because at the end of the day, if the government adopts a technology solution and it doesn't work with your system, it's not the government that's going to end up changing. It's going to need to be your system that changes. So there's I know that businesses have a lot on their plates these days, and they're going through a lot of the technology analysis on their own. It's hard to think about getting involved in those government procedures, but I think it's so important to be providing your input and finding a way to comment on not just the regulations and the laws, but the actual technology decisions that border agencies are making that affect the import and export process.
Leah, thank you so much for that answer. That was really interesting. Naki, could I come to you finally just with your kind of tips and advice for the year ahead for our audience, given the challenges they're facing?
Absolutely, thank you. So I did try order a crystal ball, but it was on a dual listing. I didn't actually use it, unfortunately. So without knowing exactly what the specific changes are going to be, what I can say with quite a strong degree of conviction is there's going to be more complexity. There's going to be more scrutiny, and the penalties are going to get stronger. So the idea is freight forwarders need to start gearing up for this environment. I think public-private partnerships are at the core of unlocking these challenges. And we are seeing worldwide a lot of this happening, from authorized economic operator programs to a lot of deep integration. Technology, what we're also seeing, as Leah mentioned, is things are going paperless now across all the different areas of the logistical supply chain. And this is allowing government bodies to start sharing information in a way they never had before, to really check that the information that is being provided to the different bodies is all matching up. And so the ability for governments to actually screen these goods rapidly is increasing. And again, just to go back to the e-commerce environment, where instead of one company moving one container with 1,000 pairs of shoes, there's now 1,000 discrete shipments, each with one pair of shoe. So this makes it impossible to operate manually anymore. It's impossible for the freight forward. It's impossible for the governments to deal with those volumes. And so what I believe is we'll only see more acceleration in the digitization. We'll see more sharing of information across government bodies, so that it will be much easier for the government to find those proverbial needles in the haystack. And it's a really important time for freight forwarders to invest in, first of all, internal processes and people to focus on these challenges, and then to enable and empower these people with technology and training to ensure that they can turn these challenges into opportunities and ensure that these are actually enablers for their business.
Thanks, Naki. I think the fact that the phrase needle in the haystack and crystal ball has been used now several times on this webinar really gives a sense of the scale of the challenge that we're facing. Before we finish, we've got some questions from our audience that I wanted to put to our speaker lineup. Now, we had one question about cyber security, and this was from Taslima. Thank you, Taslima, for your question. So the question is, what about the cybersecurities involved in each step? How to ensure a safe business environment? So Naki, I wanted to get your thoughts, and Freya and Leah, if you have any thoughts on this as well, feel free to chime in after Naki's kind of said his piece.
Absolutely. So cybersecurity is becoming a significant risk and challenge across all industries, but we are seeing a special focus being paid to our industry. And we can understand, that aside from just the criminal elements who might be looking to penetrate into supply chains, supply chain, the movement of goods is actually often a national security concern as well. So risks of cybersecurity along the supply chain are incredibly serious. And the sophistication of these hackers and nefarious players along the supply chain is only going up. So what happens is every additional piece of technology that a company has, every additional system, server, wherever it might be, even if it's just a small system that's just used to do a small little thing in a country which isn't even the main office, this provides a window, a back door into the systems, and it provides additional surface area which can allow that someone can breach it in the back door and insert some malicious code into the system, and that then leads to these major supply chain failures, which are driven by supply chain. So it is so, which are driven by, hacking and cybersecurity issues. And so it's so important to ensure that all of your service providers are really investing deeply and have strong priorities around ensuring that, that they are taking all the precautions required and necessary in such an environment. And again, the question is, there's so many steps and so many areas that a company is operating along in the supply chain, each potentially being an area of risk, that it becomes vitally important for companies to do an inventory of their systems, where possible, try unify systems and reduce that surface area of risk, and really have very careful processes in place to ensure that they are auditing their service providers and that those service providers are, holding up to the latest standards in terms of how we respond to supply chain risk.
Thanks, Naki, for that answer. That's great. Thank you, Taslima, for the question again. So we had another question specifically with regards to ocean carriers, and this was from Pierce. Thank you, Pierce. So Pierce asks, how do these new tools created for forwarders to manage compliance translate to ocean carriers, including carriers who use CargoWise for their operations? And so Naki, could I come back to you again for that question?
Certainly. So again, there's many different players along the supply chain, each who are dealing with different areas. And so the more we're able to share the information between the different players and ensure that this is being shared in a secure manners, it's very important. So with carriers specifically, there's electronic bill of ladings, which are being generated now, which is really reduces the chances of corruption at that level. The bill of lading is often linked to the manifest of what's going into those containers. And so when the containers are being packed and unpacked, you've suddenly got a manifest which is saying these are all the goods. And those also relate to the bill of ladings and the masters and the houses. But then what happens is there is a supplier's invoice, which is getting captured against at a line level again, with this time tariff headings, and that again gets declared to customs. And now we've got a tie-up of the supplier's invoice to what's being declared. And so what we're seeing across all these different areas, including the carriers, is that there's suddenly this triangulation of information through all the different parties to ensure that everything's matching up. Now, in an ideal situation, it's not people phoning each other and saying, did you get the goods? Are container matches matching up? Are the bill of lading matching? It's actually all being done electronically, which obviously creates efficiencies, but more important, it creates deep accuracy, great visibility, and getting close to live visibility of these goods as they are flowing through the supply chain.
Thanks, Naki. We've had one question live come in just now from Todd Albers. And so some of the questions, just for audience's perspective, some of the questions were submitted at registration days and some of them have just come in live now. And so Todd, thank you for your question. And this is around data standards. And the question is, how do data standards and common market practices come into play to help reduce friction? Now, I'm curious to know if any of our speakers can help Todd with this question and answer it. Is this something that any of you kind of have a perspective on? How do data standards and common market practices come into play to help reduce friction?
That's not, I might jump in here to mention that, like I said before, the trade community is embarking on this journey of digitalization and digitization. And so we are working on developing, standards are being developed all over the world to help share data in an interoperable manner. And I am not aware of, there are many standards that are being used globally. A lot of these digitalization standards are still in development stage. I think we're sort of at a DHS beta stage where one will rise to the top, but we don't know how they're going to interplay as the standard setting process is developing. But when it does, it's going to be huge because governments are clamoring for these kind of standards and traders are frankly clamoring for these kind of standards. I think that at the end of the day, the goal needs to be interoperability, which is a word that's thrown around quite a bit and nobody ever defines it. But what the interoperability that I think we should focus in on is interoperability where many types of technology and many technology providers can plug in to each other's systems and can use each other's systems, not harmonization, and not even, oh, we'll all use the same technology provider, because then that'll lead to vendor lock-in. So maybe another message for business from this webinar is get involved in the standard setting process, be monitoring those standards that are coming out. They're incredibly important. And there's, I think, generally speaking, in the trade space, there's still an opportunity to shape them. And I think especially governments and traders need to be careful of this idea that we all need to be on exactly the same platform, because that's never going to happen. And that platform is going to be out of date before it even gets set up. So I think we need to focus in on that idea of interoperability that is as decentralized and open as possible to create room for innovation, new solutions to plug in, and new providers to come into the scene. And I hope that answers the question, because it's a really important one.
And I was just going to add to that as well, if I may, from a UK-European perspective, and Leah sort of pretty much summed it up actually, but there is no particular standards, certainly on this side of the house, in terms of what that data looks like. We've mentioned it, of course, in the webinar already, saying, we're still, getting ourselves up to speed in the trade export control, freight forwarding, perspective. There are other industries that are way more advanced and have been doing this for 10, 20 years. So we're still, we're getting there, slightly behind the curve, but we're getting there. And I think, we've got new bodies here in the UK. We've got OTSI, the Office of Trade Sanctions Implementation, that just launched this October. So we're starting to see a real, decisive action from certainly the UK government in saying, look, we're going to take this more seriously. We're going to put better guidance out. We're going to look at doing better enforcement. And I think on Leah's point as well about data providers, I mean, it's impossible to use one, for everyone to use one system, because there is no one system that does everything. There are various systems out there that are great at the very specific parts of what they do, but you have to look at a holistic approach for this as well. So in terms of standards, there's no one level to be aiming at. There's nothing out there that really gives you what a regulatory standard is, but there's advisories, there's guidance. Read it, make sure that you have an understanding of it, but do make sure you're looking at that holistic approach when you're looking at your own data and technology resources.
Thanks, Freya, and thank you, Leah, both for your answers. Todd, I hope that has answered your question. We are coming towards the end of the webinar now, and so I just wanted to give a moment for some closing comments just from each of our speakers, some last pieces of advice off the back of this conversation. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you all so much for joining here. I'll just go around now and just give you all a chance to sort of say your final words. Naki, could I come to you first on final thoughts and final piece of advice?
Yeah, no, thanks. It's been a great conversation. Really, we've touched on it from a lot of different angles, and the right time to get involved in making these decisions and acting on it is today, or even yesterday, perhaps. And so, wherever you are in terms of your journey towards compliance in the company, take that next step, because it is important. And each company has a next step that they need to take, but it's important to work out where you are and what you need to do to ensure that you're compliant, and start by taking that next step.
Great. Thank you, Naki. Leah, could I come to you next?
Sure. I think the big takeaway that we'd like to pass along is that as you are taking those next steps, as you are actively upgrading your digital approach to compliance and to trade, be looking inwards, but also be looking outwards, because you can provide a lot of insight to governments, to standard setting procedures and organizations, to associations, to other organizations. even international organizations. We need your insight, and we need your input going forward so that we can do as good a job on the government side as we hope you're doing on the business side.
Amazing. Thank you, Leah. And Freya, your final thoughts before we finish?
Yeah, I think Leah, you stole it from me. I was going to say, public-private partnerships, I think is so crucial. And even when I was in government, there were the conversations that I always valued the most and was so informative into the policy making. Working together to come up with global solutions to really help navigate what this looks like with whatever challenges 2025 may bring. And I think as the regulatory expectations grow, and freight forwarders and shippers must view compliance, as you said earlier here, they must view it not as a burden to business, but actually as that strategic advantage. And I think by leveraging technology in that more holistic way that we just spoke about, improving internal governance, fostering that collaboration, it will allow you to meet that regulatory demand, but also build that resilience within supply chains for your business and for the future.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you to all three of you. Thank you so much for joining today. This has been a really interesting discussion. I hope our audience have enjoyed it too. Thank you to our audience for joining. I think one of the things we've established is that none of us have any crystal balls, but we have organizations like CargoWise and Coron. We have our partners in government who will continue to collaborate with to get through this challenge. And thank you again for everyone for joining. You'll have a chance to leave your feedback at the end of this webinar. Thank you to CargoWise, a sponsor for this session, and goodbye to everyone. Catch you at the next Reuters Event Supply Chain webinar.